Just another day at the office, that.
Yeah. It was a good one. Good day, yeah.
Look, a lot of excitement around the whole Wrexham story and lots to dig into today, but thank you guys for joining us. How have the last few days been since that result?
Quite fun. Yeah, I'd recommend it. If you've never been promoted out of the National League, I'd do it if I were you. It's good.
Shaun, how are you feeling? Feeling tip-top this morning?
Better this morning than Sunday morning, and a little bit better than Monday morning.
Now, there's like I said, a lot to dig into on the on-field stuff, also the off-field stuff, and the whole journey that you guys have been on. Just quickly for those that know, because obviously the headlines are normally built around Ryan and Rod, the ownership group, but just give us a little sense of what your respective roles are for the organisation before we jump into it.
Yeah, so I'm executive director of the club, and you know what that means in real terms often is that I operate as a kind of liaison between Rob and Ryan and the people on the ground of the club that are really doing the work, like Shaun, like Fleur Robinson, our CEO, I also sort of was part of the process of finding the club at the start. I kind of introduced Rob to the notion of football. He'd never really seen the point of it before, yeah, I've sort of fallen into this role and very much enjoy it.
Yeah, no, obviously I helped at the time of the takeover because obviously COVID was around and nobody could actually come over from the US to actually look at the club. So my initial role was to try and help set a strategy in place, you know, to try and get to deliver against the club's mission statement. And you know that's what we've done, and we've followed it since. I mean, I was never supposed to be here for any length of time. It was a favour to a mate to help him find the club, and then yeah, we're still here 2 years later.
And sure, your background, you've previously been at Leeds and also at the EFL, so this is a different sort of experience, a different angle on working in the football business for you.
It is. I mean, there's a quote in the first series of the documentary about being overqualified for the job. I mean, the bottom line is I don't think anybody's overqualified for any job, to be brutally honest. You know, you just got to use the experience that you have. And, you know, and the experience of running football clubs for 20 years and then the EFL for 6 years has actually just helped me create a framework for all the positive that Rob and Ryan have wanted to deliver, you know, to try and help make it the success story it is today.
And Humphrey, how does it feel now that in the UK you're an accomplished actor and writer in the US?
Thank you, Nick. Very kind.
Very accomplished. You're currently in a multi-season show, American Auto, I think.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Those put your hands above if you tuned into American Auto.
No one's going to do. Nick, that's absolutely.
I hope more people have watched Welcome to Wrexham.
That's quite rightly, none of you have seen it because no one's watched it in America. So the chances of anyone watching it here is pretty slim. I will say it is on Sky Comedy and Now TV. So if you guys are a loose end tonight, you could tune in there. But yeah, it's a very strange juxtaposition coming from that's the day job over here, over there, and then football's the day job over here. And you know, whilst I'm there, often I'm at work and getting emails about whatever it may be, and vice versa. When I'm here, I'm working on things and sending them back over to the US. Yeah, so it's strange.
You said you helped. I just wanted to take a step back and think about the journey to this point. You said you helped find the club, and you guys worked in the earlier stages in that journey. Just talk us through how you got to that point of acquiring the club itself. What was in those early stages?
Well, it was so. What happened was. In LA, we were told, right, we're going to be locked down for 2 weeks. That was the idea. You know, at the start of March 2020, there was this sense of well, this is strange, this whole COVID thing, but it should blow over quite soon. And I was working at the time as a writer on an Apple TV show called Mythic Quest, 3 seasons, currently available on Apple TV. But watch American Auto first because I get more money for that. We all went home for 2 weeks thinking this is going to be a short sort of break, holiday type thing. And we exchanged a lot of, you should watch this program or read this book or here's a sourdough recipe or all those things that people did at the start of lockdown. And for Rob, I said, you should watch this documentary, Sunderland Till I Die, because he'd made a lot of fun of me loving football. He's a big sport fan. But like many Americans, like, they all pass sideways and it's boring. There's not enough points and they don't do enough this, that, and the other. And I said, watch that and you'll understand the relationship that we in the UK have with our football teams. And arguably in Europe. It's a very different thing, I think, to American sports fandom where you often are spreading your love around multiple different teams. Watch this, it's all about football. And he came back and said, we should do this. We should buy a football team. And my response was like, ha, 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 sounds cool. I'd love to do that one day. And he was like, no, seriously, like, how much would it cost? So that's what sort of got the ball rolling. I had nothing else to do, so like, well, I'll go and do some research and started to look around and be like, oh, well, I suppose a National League club you could get for sort of between, you know, £0 and a couple of £1 million probably. And he's like, we can do that. So, well, all right. And then he went away and spoke to John Landgraf, who's the head of FX, which is a channel over in the States, and sold 2 seasons of a documentary. And was like, right, what team are we buying? So then it became my job to kind of trawl through, you know, all these many great storied clubs in British football and work out which one was the best fit for us, which was Wrexham.
And so when did you come into the picture, Shaun?
I think I came into the picture when it was a case of Steve Horowitz, who'd been involved in the process, rang me and said, can you just help me? Can you go and have a look at Wrexham and see if what they are telling us is true? To which I said, absolutely, because like Humphrey just said, we were all stuck with COVID, and ultimately any opportunity to get out of the house at that particular time was welcome. So I set off to North Wales to have a quick look round, and yes, the stadium was where they said it was. That's about the only thing that was consistent with what we'd been told.
Yeah.
But generally, you know, that was the involvement, and it was, and as I alluded to earlier, it was just that guidance to help to start with, to bridge the gap that COVID had created, to be, you know, a trusted person in the UK who could answer, you know, the questions that were being asked, and actually probably more appropriately know why the questions were being asked, to try and shortcut the process. Because ultimately there was never going to be any warranties. It was sold as seen, and of course, you know, Rob having sold the rights to the documentary probably meant it was always going to happen. We just needed to make sure there was nothing that was actually going to derail the process before it could actually start. I mean, because the objective, and you know, Humphrey and Steve knew this from the start, was that Rob and Ryan, once I actually found out who it was. The issue was that they wanted to ensure that any money they put into the club was actually there to take it forward, rather than just to fill, you know, to fill a hole left by somebody else. Because unless they could create that positive difference, it was never going to work. And it was that type of criteria that really sort of formed how the decision was made to buy Wrexham. And you know, we talk about it now, you know, with great fondness. It was, you know, Wrexham was a club that was dying ultimately. It wasn't dying because of mismanagement. It was dying because the supporters trust that owned it didn't have the money to be able to do anything other than survive. So effectively, there wasn't any debt per se, because they couldn't find any credit from anybody. You know, and so literally, them being on hard times and having to run the club in that way was actually what made the takeover possible. You know, and you know, 2 years on, everybody's looking at it now as a completely different model to what's been there before.
I think we've got a little clip from the documentary series. Actually, before we play that, who hasn't watched it? Any hands up? There's one. Oh, there's a few hands. So you got a crowd. You can get some new
Humphrey, deal with them
after this.
Where are you guys for American Auto? It's unbelievable.
Let's play the clip and let's get into it from there.
I've got with me Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney, the new owners of Wrexham AFC.
What was the connection between you and Wrexham Football Club?
We had no direct connection. It was just a feeling.
What me and my dad thought was, because Wrexham's red, and Deadpool's red.
That's the real reason, sorry. I think the biggest challenge is the community looking around going, what the fuck are these two guys doing here?
Welcome to Wrexham.
Only fools rush in. Is that the gym?
Holy shit.
Yes, these will work.
Wrexham is a town that battles against odds constantly. But the thing that we love more than anything is the football club.
It's an underdog story. And it's about interconnectivity between the club and the community.
Football's more than a game. It's not life and death. It's more important than that.
You're watching those games with your kids and your father, your mother, but I don't remember any specific game. I just remember watching my dad.
If they're successful, it will be the biggest day in the history of the town.
Looks pretty good, doesn't it? Oh.
It's
Right,
worth a
you're going
watch.
to tune in now, aren't you? Those people that put their hand up earlier, I'm sure. So, Shaun, I'm guessing in terms of the strategy of actually taking the club forward, to take it into that next phase and to ultimately get it where it is today, you had to formalize a strategy. I don't think there's any sort of precursors or examples of this sort of journey or experience happening in the football world up until this point. How did you come up with that strategy to determine, what what players to be looking at, how to approach the coaching, the management side of things? How did you look at all of that to try and put all those pieces together to build a strategy you were confident you could get to where you are today?
I think the first thing that we did was publicise what the club's objectives were. And there's a mission statement that states what it was that we were setting out to do. Paraphrasing, it was to get promoted to the EFL, tick. It was to improve the racecourse ground, tick. And it was to deliver community benefit. So we actually had a really clear objective as to what we wanted to achieve through the new ownership of the club. So, there's 3 distinct different strands. So each one could be attacked differently. And, ultimately, the better the players you sign, the better chance you have of getting promoted. So the on-field targets are, there's not a lot clever, really. Ultimately, all you've got to do is try and recruit the right players, have the right manager to do that, and beat the opposition. So that strategy on the pitch was to invest where we needed it sensibly. But what we did decide at the start was that the players that we were bringing in, we wanted to make sure they were capable of playing in at least League Two. Because I recognise that a constant turnover of players on a regular basis isn't necessarily the way forward. So we did something which was very unusual for the National League, which was to sign the majority of the players on 3-year contracts. 1 year to get out, 1 year to consolidate, and 1 year to move on. Now, obviously, the story goes that we didn't get promoted the first year. But the logic was that we wanted a group of players because, I recognise that you usually need about 3 transfer windows to be able to create a squad that plays in the identity of the manager and what he wants to be able to achieve. And of course, we had existing players on the books already. So the on-field stuff was fairly straightforward. In terms of off the field, that's where we had most licence. And of course, the first 18 months, of course, there was no documentary. The documentary was being filmed, but it hadn't been seen by anybody. So everybody was waiting to see what it was going to be like. So that first 18 months, we just operated like any real normal football club. We just happened to have 2 Hollywood owners who could command column inches whenever they opened their mouths. So, we utilised that and deployed that to raise the profile of the club in advance of the documentary coming out. And then, of course, the documentaries come out both here in the USA and, you've seen the explosion of publicity around the club. So it was all about creating a framework that allowed the club to progress against its identified targets, but do it in such a way that it allowed Rob and Ryan to utilise their image, their personalities and their profile to promote the club. So, the wider I could set those parameters for them, the better the use and most progress we were going to make. And it had to be wide because they are mavericks. They are loose cannons every so often. And, if I had any hair, they'd make me pull it out. But the reality is that we keep it tight, so we know what we're doing. And, we've been on such an exponential growth. I genuinely believe there's no club in the world has gone on the same growth as what Wrexham has at this moment in time. And, we've made mistakes along the way, but, we had the policy, conscious policy from the start, to go forward as quickly as we could, acknowledging and accepting that we wouldn't necessarily pick up every single opportunity on the way, but we'd have a better chance of being successful the further we got down the road as quickly as possible. So that's been the strategy. good, sensible decision-making on the pitch and trying to, to get everything in behind there, waiting for the documentary to arrive. If the documentary's arrived, and let's be right, we're sat up here talking to you today because it's been a success.
Humphrey, how do you get the balance right, though, in terms of you've got Ryan and Rob and yourself with the comedian backgrounds to ensure that both the community and the widest football world is taking you seriously in those early stages? Obviously now it's a bit further down the line, but initially they might think, all right, this might not be such a real serious ploy here. This is a bit of fun for them. How did you navigate that? Because I guess it's a fine line to get that balance right of talking about the personalities and so forth that Shaun talked about.
No, completely. I mean, I think to start off with, there probably were quite a few people around football and things that looked at us a little bit askance and thought, okay, what is this? Is it a gimmick? Is it just for the documentary? Is it this, that, and the other? I think one of the things we did, very early on, and we were very clear about, was that we acknowledged that the three of us did not know how to run a football club. I was the lifetime football fan. They were both neophytes to the world of football, but I was very aware there was a vast gap between what I knew as a fan and what the knowledge base that was required to run a football club. So that's where Shaun came in. And that's where Fleur Robinson came in, and that's where Les Reed, who joined us on the kind of football technical side of things, came in. Our philosophy was, let's find people who know what they're doing and empower them. I think often, you can see lots of examples around football historically of people coming in sometimes from other businesses and being like, well, I'm a successful businessman. I know how to run a plastics business. This football club thing can't be all that different. We're going to run it the same way you run a plastics business. And they interfere with signings and tactics and whatever else it may be. And one of the things that I think, and Shaun may disagree, that we've been pretty good about is remaining true to that philosophy of saying, right, let's find people who know what they're doing, back them, empower them, and then we will enjoy the process.
So you've got this documentary series underpinning the direction for it. And now you're building an organisation that's now into the EFL. You're adding those different commercial layers to it. There's revenue coming in. How does that commercial sort of flywheel look like? Where are you prioritising in terms of the growth off the field, in terms of revenues, to make it a more sustainable club? Because obviously there's going to be a point where you can't just rely on, documentary series and goodwill from the ownership group. It's something you need to make sustainable. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, so... Yeah, as I said, we are now only just getting the benefits of the documentary, because ultimately it was seen in August. The first lot of commercial deals that we did all expire this summer, because we knew there was 2 series of the documentary, so everything was linked to that. So this is the first real time we've had to go to market with all those properties with the actual biggest commercial asset, the documentary, behind it to be able to sell. So there will be a quantum leap in our revenue generation simply because we've got to the end of that first cycle. When we took TikTok and Expedia on as our sponsors, it was as much to do with exposure and advertising around the documentary in the US as it was about supporting Wrexham Football Club. What we've managed to do because of the documentary is to change that dynamic. So it's now about being associated with a football club that's also on the documentary. And that's the key dynamic that's changed. It was documentary led, now it's football club led with support from the documentary. And that's what we always needed to achieve, because ultimately what promotion brings to the EFL is, yes, increased revenue, increased profile, but a slightly more rigid framework to be able to work within. And of course we go back in at the bottom again rather than the top. But if the football club is ultimately going to be successful, and that's what Rob and Ryan want, they want the football club to be successful. I mean, they're probably successful enough in their own right not to be over concerned about, a little bit more adulation or success. But the reality is we're moving now from being what a lot of people saw as a novelty value and everybody's favourite second team, we're actually moving into the mainstream. Now, if we're going to achieve Rob and Ryan's objective of being a successful football club, we have to get into the mainstream. But that also then presents a different set of challenges as well. It's not everybody's favourite cousin anymore that can be patted on the head and, oh, what a wonderful story. As soon as you start becoming a threat, then that's a challenge. And the other thing is, obviously, it was all positioned as being the underdog. It was a town that had been down on its luck 15 years outside the EFL. You know, and there is that slight contradiction. How can you be an underdog when you're spending more money than anybody else? But actually, the narrative's actually more complex than that, because it's actually the town, or the city as it is now, of Wrexham that's the underdog. It's that's the entity that needed the lift. Rob and Ryan's sole purpose was to deliver community benefit through the lens and the focus of the football club. So Wrexham will always be the underdog. You know, it's cast afloat from South Wales. You know, it's very much isolated. You know, it considers itself closer to Manchester and Liverpool than it ever would do to Cardiff and Swansea. So, you know, so the town and the city is the underdog, and the people in there, not necessarily the football club. The football club is now the vehicle that's taking forward. And we're beginning to see it. Those that want to knock the project, and it's not my favourite word, but knock the club, are now pointing to the fact, you know, to trying to highlight, well, how can you be the underdog? But they're missing the point. And the point is simple. The community of Wrexham has been downtrodden, looked over, passed over for many, many times. I mean, even the Levelling Up Fund didn't stop at Wrexham. And, you know, the reality of the story is that that's the bit that needs to be addressed. And it's the town and the city that Rob and Ryan have adopted through the football club, not the other way around.
One of the things that came up through the journey was that fact, apparently it's really hard to get and to be watched on live stream and on live broadcast. So you guys made some, you got Ryan, I think, initially to post some tweets, which really created a whole wave of media coverage around this topic. And a lot happened after that. You seem to create quite a bit of inertia in the shift and adoption of streaming in the National League.
I think coming from North America as they do, where everything is televised, everything is available, it's very easy. You get highlights are tweeted out during games, like all that kind of thing. It's very accessible sport in every single way. It was quite a challenge for the two of us early on to explain to them why we couldn't just broadcast our own games, why we couldn't do this, why we couldn't do that. And so, you know, slowly but surely, it became pretty clear that we were going to have to do something about that. Otherwise, you know, our bodies would be found by the side of the A458 outside Wrexham.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I've been trying to explain Article 48 to two people who don't want to listen. Is a challenge. It's a challenge if people do want to listen, the logic of it sometimes. But two people who just only wanted to see what they wanted to see. Yeah. But again, why was it relevant? And it was relevant because we knew as soon as the documentary came out that we had to try and capitalise on the interest it would create in the US, which is why we started the journey of streaming much earlier than the documentary coming out. And you know, we had an advantage. We had an advantage in that every single one of our games was being filmed for the purpose of the documentary, because you know, football's a live sport. You never know when that particular moment of interest is going to come. So we had an infrastructure in place that would allow us to stream games straight away. You know, and the frustration from my perspective, I mean, their frustration was, why can't we do it? My frustration was, I understand why you can't do it, but I don't understand the logic why you can't do it. Because ultimately, BT owned the rights to the National League, only broadcast a very small number of games in the UK. They held the international rights and didn't use them. So nobody was ever going to be negatively impacted by the club being able to stream the games. You know, the answer's no. And, you know, there was all sorts of reasons given about integrity of competition and competitive balance. Yeah, most of it was just, you know, effectively trying to avoid the position. But obviously, having been at the EFL and created iFollow, I understood how this could actually work. And we got to the stage where, at the start of this season, the documentary was now airing. You could see the interest in the US, and we were really concerned about missing the boat in anything other than, you know, in anything other than film a documentary. How do you keep those people engaged after the documentary's finished? And yeah, we got to a breaking point where the conversation with Ryan is, do you fancy creating a bit of a stir? He didn't take much persuading, it's fair to say. I said, well, just do this. All right, and obviously that's when the fallout started. Now, you will listen to the National League. The project was already well underway, and it was coming anyway. Anyway, whatever the reason for it was, we didn't mind. Because actually, what we said was, if you are worried about competitive balance and the fact that we generated all this additional revenue, we'll give you it all back. We're not interested at that stage in the money until everybody has the same opportunity. We just want to ensure that we don't miss out on being able to capitalise on the new fan base that we're creating.
So in short now, where we've got to is there's a National League player platform where all the games are being streamed, or some of the games are being streamed. Those who can.
All, yeah.
Absolutely, they're all being streamed now overseas. Obviously, they're still subject to
pay-per-view. Or
yeah, absolutely. The traditional one. In fact, I mean, the National League went the model that I actually think a lot of sports entities have considered, and that's have all the games on one channel. It's amusing when you look at the different, I've been in these discussions for years and years and years. A single channel showing one full competition is probably the way the Premier League, if they were ever going to adopt it, would go. But nobody's ever been brave enough to do it before. But because the National League had nothing to lose, the answer was, why not? Because there was no international distribution. So it will be interesting. I mean, traditionally broadcasters have run a million miles away from allowing a single entity to have its own exclusive outlet. So it will be an interesting debate, and it'll be really interesting going forward how successful NLTV is now without Wrexham, because we've definitely been able to turbocharge it to start with. It will be down to them how much they are actually able to maximise it from there.
And so now it'll be iFollow that they will be watching in from.
Absolutely, Wrexham becomes, as a member of the EFL, obviously we've got the ability to stream games overseas and domestically when Article 48 doesn't apply.
I'm expecting the audiences in the US to be significantly higher than perhaps what we get in the UK. I'm not sure that's fair to say or not, but I'm curious that you obviously have this US tour that you've also planned out. Humphrey, that sounds like it's a pretty interesting proposition. You've got games against Chelsea and Manchester United, and a $1 million 7v7 takes all money, win all, what do you call it?
Winner takes all.
Winner takes all. Gosh, I should really upgrade my notes there. Winner takes all. That's a pretty big little trip that you've got planned for the US there. How did that all play out, and what are you expecting to get out of that?
Well, I mean, for us...
Other than beating, obviously, Manchester United and Chelsea.
Yeah, we wanted a nice, gentle warm-up before the season, so we thought we'd give them a walloping in America. Well, no, I mean, listen, as you said, as we all know, there's this extraordinary level of interest in what we're doing at Wrexham in the US, and so, everything we can do to cement that interest and lock some of those people in so that it isn't just a passing fancy, it isn't a thing that they're, into for now, and if the documentary, we don't know how long the documentary is going to run for, but once that goes away, we want all of those people to still be on iFollow or watching us, on TV and to come and see us in person. It's the same reason, we're basically doing it for the same reason that Chelsea and United are going over there.
They're using your profile to grow bigger in the US. Is that
yeah, I think so. I think so. Yeah, they're trying to those like eels that attach themselves to sharks. Very much is how I see them.
Yeah. He's got a beautiful way with words, hasn't he? That's his eating education. Anyway, moving on. I mean, so the Chelsea and Man United games are all about, creating profile. But actually, the 7 versus 7 tournament what we worked out was our season was obviously going to finish. Thankfully, it's finishing this Saturday and not the playoffs. And what we were concerned about is how do you ensure that everything remains current? Because if we've got a squad of players where there's not going to be massive turnover, how do you keep people's interest for the next 2 months before pre-season starts again? So the actual 7 versus 7 tournament at the start of June is all about bridging that gap to ensure that there's always something going on at the football club that people can follow. And then obviously the US tour is it's pre-season and it is about getting ready for the season, which is its number one priority. But it's been absolute nonsense not to go to the US to capitalise on that support and hopefully cement it. Because we all know that support does win, it sometimes follows success. And unless it's the first club you've ever had, you have to keep working with, you can't take anything for granted. So us putting a shift in to go to the US and do this is about trying to cement that support base before the second series of the documentary airs, and then of course we're into another season, so we've got that continuity of keeping Wrexham in front of everybody's eyeballs. And whether you want it there or not, what we've managed to do is to command this way above average column inches about the club going forward.
Okay, we've got a bunch of questions coming in from the audience, so I'm going to jump into those because we're going to be running out of time shortly. So, great question from Sue Ansis regarding the great story that you guys have created, but you wouldn't know the club have a women's team from that fabulous trailer we just showed. What will change in your priorities moving forwards around the women's side?
Yeah, well, I mean, the women's team was sort of effectively defunct before we came in, and Rob and Ryan committed some money to that program. And in the last 2 years, we have just been, we just won the Gennaro Adran North title, and they won their playoff game against Britain Ferry and were promoted. And I know that in the second season of the documentary, that's a huge focus of that. I think at the time, what's strange about the first season of the documentary is that it actually straddles a season and a half. So you have a whole section of the documentary that covers a period where the women's team didn't actually exist. Now, you can absolutely say they should have gone in and talked about the setup of that in season 1. But season 2, I know it is a big focus of what they're doing. We had our final league game of the season at the racecourse in front of 9,500 people. It was the largest crowd for a women's game in Wales ever, and we're very proud of that. And it's going to be hard for us to beat that because that's basically us at capacity.
Having been a vocal supporter of the National League streaming, would Wrexham support all EFL games being streamed in the UK, even at 3 p.m? Shaun, how about you take that one?
I'll tell you what, from an anonymous speaker, I think I could probably guess a few people who that might be.
That was on my list, but I just knew it was going to come from the audience, so I didn't bother throwing it at you.
Yeah, but I mean, 3 p.m. Saturday, where do you start on the 3 p.m. Saturday debate? I mean, from Wrexham's perspective, at this moment in time, removing the Article 48 blackout would make absolutely no difference to the attendances at the racecourse ground. People would still come. It'd probably still be full, so it would all be additional revenue. If I'm going to be slightly balanced and go back to my previous role, I'm not so sure that's the case at Carlisle, Port Vale, Crewe, and others. So whilst 3 p.m. streaming would work definitely for Wrexham at the moment, if we're going to look at what suits football best overall, there will have to be some form of protection for the smaller clubs in relation to attendances on match days, and it's not the die-hard fan I'm worried about. The fan who's always watched Carlisle will go and watch Carlisle. It's the fan who sometimes goes to Carlisle to watch football, but he's probably a Manchester United fan who may no longer go to Carlisle because he can sit at home and watch Manchester United on a Saturday afternoon. And that's the challenge that everybody has to get over.
That's the fear. Just jumping in there, that's the fear, right? But naturally, the other side of that conversation is that by opening up more games to watch online, more people are going to be aware of Carlisle, and therefore maybe have more of an interest to go to the game.
I agree, but it's the fear of the unknown, and I think reading the recent media that my former colleagues at the EFL have decided to stay in a traditional broadcasting opportunity rather than to go down a streaming route probably suggests that that conversation and concern is still real. It's still there, and the argument's probably not at full maturity yet.
Interestingly, our next panel is going to be with some people that were reportedly in for those rights should they have released them in DAZN. So stay tuned for that one after this session. Another question coming in: how do the die-hard Wrexham fans feel about the 10 million new Wrexham fans?
To be honest with you, one of the things I've been most astonished about during this process is how welcoming they've been of everybody there. I spoke to Wayne Jones, who runs the Turf Pub, who you would have seen in that trailer, and if you've seen the documentary, you would have seen a lot. He gets 60 to 70 Americans in the pub a day. Because we have become part of the proximity to Liverpool. I think a lot of football tourists who want to go to Anfield, go on an Anfield tour, they want to come down to the racecourse now, or go on the Beatles tour, or whatever it may be. People in Wrexham, at the moment, they love all these new fans because I think there's a combination of two things. One is if you love something, you often feel an affinity for someone else who loves that thing or has found a new love for that thing. It's a shared passion. And the other thing is just these people are coming in and helping to revitalize the town. Wayne, what was the statistic? He sold 35,000 pints on Saturday?
23,000 pints.
23,000 pints on Saturday. Almost all of those to locals, I suspect. But the volume of people that are coming into Wrexham now is great for the town. So people really welcome them. Where it will become a challenge, I think, is ticketing. We've got 10,000 seats, and if local people feel like they can't get hold of tickets because they're getting snapped up or getting scalped or any of those sorts of things. But we're working pretty hard to try and make sure that's not the case.
I mean, the thing that staying true to the local community is at the heart of everything that we're trying to do. So there's no desire, just for example, to double the prices because we know we could sell the tickets to a new audience. What we recognise is, and what is the fact, is the people coming through the turnstiles at the racecourse ground still tend to come from a 20-mile radius of Wrexham. Generalistic, because if people moved away, but ultimately that will be true. So we're always going to make sure that actually the racecourse ground is in the majority frequented by local people, because if we don't, we actually break one of our own commitments, which was to stay loyal to the local community for the sake of what would be a few quid. Well, we'd be better raising that from other places than going against the principles that we need to achieve. So the new fan base are more than welcome. How they're going to consume Wrexham going forward is all part of the journey in relation to streaming of games and everything else.
A final easy question for you. There's been lots of media coverage on you guys lately, if you didn't notice. A lot from the UK football media world. One of them suggesting that you guys are going to become the next City Football Group and buy lots of other clubs. Any take on comment on that?
I spend a lot of time flying back and forth from LA to Wales. I'm not sure I can fly anywhere else as well. So that's my take on it.
It's interesting. Wrexham really worked for this particular project, and because of the documentary, for all the reasons that we've outlined, and it could work in other ways. I don't necessarily think that Wrexham is the next City Football Group.
I'd be impressed if you did.
Well, but what I do think Wrexham has been able to put on the map for people is that you could look at Rob and Ryan's ownership of Wrexham as their version of philanthropy, and that's not easy for a Yorkshireman to say, by the way, because ultimately they're losing money. They're putting money into supporting a community project to deliver that community benefit. And I think what a lot of people have realised is how much enjoyment you could actually get by delivering good and using the football club as that vehicle. I mean, I often liken to it, the rich individual can probably buy another painting to put on the wall of another gallery that people will walk past and see and say, oh, that's nice, I'm glad I've had the opportunity to look at that. And by the time they've got out of the doors of the gallery, they've probably forgotten actually the person that put it there for them to be able to see. What we've actually done is that painting is actually Wrexham Football Club, because that's where the investment has gone into and where the community benefit is being delivered from. So actually, rather than supporting and by the way, they both support loads and loads of different projects, but this one, they're actually getting to live and feel and enjoy the ride for effectively what is the money that they're donating to a local community. And actually, the more people I speak to, the more people, particularly from America, where this seems to be prevalent, I'm looking, we could do that and create all this good for a group of people. And how much better is that going to make us feel? But actually, how much real difference does it make to that local community? And if anybody ever wants to see a test case, just look at Wrexham, because that could be repeated, albeit not by us particularly. And that was the relevance, Nick, that, not the city, not that group, but that principle could be adopted in a lot of different places.
Well, I did look on the Wrexham Tourism website earlier and did see that you guys were front and centre on there. So you've obviously had a big impact to the community and to tourism in the area. But look, that's all we got time for. Thank you very much to Shaun, Harvey and Humphrey for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.